A misty morning. Beneath the canopy of the deep forest, someone lies motionless by the stream. Their breath still faintly there, but their memories seem to have vanished somewhere far away. At the same time, in the city, an emergency meeting is called. John, the illegal timber dealer who brought endless trouble to James, is now wanted across the entire region. And while everyone is busy chasing the darkness, the only light in James's life, Diep, has disappeared without a trace. Who dragged Diep into this whirlpool of chaos? John, or another hidden hand pulling the strings from the shadows? And will love be strong enough to push James beyond all limits? To find the woman he once promised to protect for the rest of his life? Join me in today's episode. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us reach 1,000 followers and bring you even more heartfelt stories. The ground was still damp with morning dew. Along a winding dirt path, a man lay motionless by the slope. Faint light filtered through the banana leaves, falling upon James's pale face. His lips cracked, breath shallow, and his clothes covered in dust and mud after a long night of running and exhaustion. In the distance, the murmur of a stream echoed softly, like the quiet rhythm of time passing, unaware that someone lay lost between life and despair. On the other side of the hill, an old woman with silver hair was bent over picking vegetables. Her steps were slow, her calloused hands carefully gathering bundles of morning dew-soaked water spinach. When she turned toward the stream, her gaze caught sight of a figure lying sprawled by the path. Her aging eyes froze for a moment. Amid the lush green of the leaves, that image felt like a crack splitting through peace itself. She dropped her basket and hobbled closer. "Oh dear, who could this be? My child, what happened to you?" Her voice trembled, part fear, part compassion. Her thin hand rested on James's wrist. The pulse was still there, faint but steady. A quiet breath escaped his lips, and she smiled softly. "Still breathing. Heaven must have mercy after all." She tried to lift him, but his body was too heavy. Her frail shoulders shook under the weight. At last, she ran to call the neighbors, and together they carried him to her small home. In the old brick kitchen, she lit the stove, boiled a pot of ginger water, and gently wiped his face and hands with a worn towel. The scent of smoke mingled with the warmth of ginger, spreading softly through the air. When James opened his eyes, before him was a kind face, wrinkled eyes filled with compassion. "You're awake, child. Just rest. You must be so tired," she said, her voice gentle as morning mist. He looked around, dazed, then nodded faintly. "Yes, thank you, ma'am." She poured him a cup of warm water and placed it in his hands. "Whatever happened, deal with it slowly. Everyone has moments of weakness. What matters is, as long as you're alive, you can start again. You hear?" James stayed silent. His eyes glistened. Perhaps from the steam, or perhaps from the quiet tenderness of her words. Outside, the first sunlight streamed through the banana leaves, spilling across the old brick wall. The humble house suddenly glowed in a soft golden hue. In a place where loneliness once lingered, a stranger's hand had reached out, lifting someone who had fallen. James bid farewell to the old woman with heartfelt gratitude. The morning sunlight glimmered on her silver hair, casting their long shadows across the village path. He turned back for one last look, the warmth of her kindness still lingering in his chest, a rare feeling in a life full of turmoil and uncertainty. At that very moment, in a brightly lit meeting room, the police task force had gathered in full. The air was tense, stretched tight like a drawn string. On the wall, maps of the logging forest and several marked red zones stood out under the light. The commanding officer rose to his feet, his voice firm yet low. "We've captured 2 of the smugglers, and all their statements point to John. But if that's all we've got, the evidence still isn't strong enough. He's too clever to fall into our trap that easily." The room fell silent, save for the soft rustle of papers being turned. A plan was set in motion. Their eyes met, filled with resolve. But behind that determination lay an unspoken fear. When it comes to a man like John, nothing is ever certain. James stepped into the house, his movement slow, shoulders slumped as if he had just walked through a storm. His hair was disheveled, his shirt stained with dust from the road, and his eyes vacant, lifeless. He stood silently in the softly lit room, where the faint scent of his mother's morning tea still lingered. His mother looked up. At the sight of him, joy briefly crossed her face, only to be replaced by worry as she noticed his pallor. "James, what's wrong, son?" The question was gentle, yet it pierced his heart like a needle. James bit his lip, his voice trembling. "Mom, Diep is missing. The police are searching, but there's still no lead." The room suddenly felt heavy, thick with silence. His mother froze, her hand on the table trembling. Her face turned pale, her breath came short. "You said Diep is missing?" she whispered, her voice breaking, eyes wide in shock. Then suddenly, she staggered. Before James could react, she collapsed into the chair, her eyes fluttering shut, her breathing faint. "Mom! Mom!" He rushed forward, catching her as she fell. In that instant, the world spun. Fear, guilt, and anguish crashed over him, choking his chest. He carried her to her room, laid her gently on the bed, and brushed the sweat-damp hair from her forehead. In the stillness of the room, the ticking of the clock echoed, sharp and dry. James whispered, his voice trembling. "If only I had been stronger. No one would have had to suffer like this." Sitting in the living room, the sunlight from the window fell across his pale face. On the table, a vase of red roses still bloomed, their color only making the room feel emptier. He picked up his phone and called Diep again. The screen lit up with the familiar name, Diep. The dial tone rang, and then went dead. Once again, only the cold voice of the operator remained. Outside, the wind stirred, rustling the leaves. Inside the quiet house, the clock ticked steadily, like the footsteps of time trampling over his unease. He stared out the window, the world outside still moving, unaware that inside this room, a man sat trembling on the edge of despair. James lifted the phone one last time, his voice hoarse. "Diep, if you can hear me, please call me back." After asking Trang to stay home and take care of his mother, James hastily threw on a white jacket. His eyes were steady, yet deep within them lay a thick cloud of worry. The mountain road stretched ahead, its peak hidden beneath drifting fog. 3 motorbikes sped forward, James and 2 local police officers. The wind howled through the forest, carrying his voice as it echoed into the distance. Deep, deep. His shouts rang out, then faded into the vast emptiness, returning only as a chilling echo. Sweat rolled down his forehead, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Every step he took on the dry leaves sounded heavy, like the weight pressing on his heart. One of the officers pointed toward a patch of forest ahead. "There are strange signs here, sir. Looks like someone's been staying around this area." James nodded and rushed forward, his voice breaking through the trees. "Diep, can you hear me? I'm here." His voice grew weaker, hoarser, swallowed by the forest. The trees blurred into a dense, endless haze before his eyes. His breath quickened, his gaze flickered, caught somewhere between despair and the faintest flicker of hope. In the misty depths of the forest, James's voice echoed again and again. "Diep!" His call broke through the fog, scattering into the damp air, only to return as the sound of wind moaning through the towering trees. Sweat and rain soaked his shoulders, yet he kept walking, kept calling, as if stopping, even for a single heartbeat, would mean losing her forever. Each cry tore through the stillness, then dissolved into silence. The green forest around him grew hazy, cold, and suffocating, leaving only his ragged breaths and the pounding of his heart. In that moment, memories flooded back, every beautiful fragment of their time together, replaying like a slow-motion film. One afternoon on a hillside, Diep had sat beside him, smiling softly. "If one day I disappeared, what would you do?" James laughed, his eyes shimmering. "I wouldn't survive, not without you." What once sounded like a tender promise now echoed through the desolate forest, like a curse bound to fate itself. Rain began to fall, tapping gently on the leaves above. James collapsed beside a tree, his hand clutching a fistful of wet soil. Rain mixed with tears running down his face. He looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Diep, wherever you are, please answer me. I'm here. I've never stopped trying." Just then, one of the officers lowered his phone and called out, "We've got a report from Van Zwen. They found a young woman who looks like Diep." James snapped his head up, a glimmer of hope flaring in his eyes. He rose to his feet and ran into the rain, his breath blending with the pounding rhythm of his footsteps. Amid the rain-soaked trees, a promise once made burns again, a flame that refuses to die. Perhaps if one still believes, love will always find its way home. Tiny against the vast green wilderness, James called out one last time, "Diep!" His voice stretched out, fading into the open air,